This episode of Bullet Heaven was made possible with donations from our awesome viewers. Portions were also created using Pack-a-Punch SCART cables from Retro Gaming Cables and the OSSC from Video Game Perfection. It's a shooting series that, along with Gradius, is almost synonymous with side-scrolling shooting. A series with a history and prestige that built its reputation on slower pace and brutal difficulty. That series is R-Type, and there are a lot of R-Type fans out there. The jury is out on what the best in the series is, with most people split between R-Type Delta and R-Type 3 being their go-tos. R-Type Leo may be pretty good, but it almost doesn't count, don't at me on that. My favorite R-Type though? Well, I thought R-Type Delta was a bit too claustrophobic, and R-Type 3 is what we in the biz call sadistic. But R-Type Final on the PlayStation 2? Now we're talking. The fair and balanced stages, the multiple hidden paths, the insane roster of 101 ships spanning several of IREM's shooting series, it was perhaps the ultimate shmup from a pure content perspective. Even if others like Gradius 5 were both better received and superior on a technical level. Still, I liked it perhaps best of all of the shmups released to the PlayStation 2 in North America. But this was also 17 years ago, and with the exception of a pair of PSP tactical strategy games, a new R-Type seemed to be completely out of the picture. It was called R-Type Final, after all. Heck, IREM itself barely exists as a subsidiary to ISO Corporation, and yet, all this time later, things have taken a rather interesting turn. R-Type Final 2 was developed and published in Asian territories by Granzella and published in North America by NIS America. It was released to the PlayStation 4, Xbox One, PC, and Nintendo Switch on April 30th, 2021. R-Type Final 2 is also supported on the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series hardware. Fans of the series have waited a long time for another R-Type game, and at a glance, this looks to fit the bill. For this review, we'll primarily be examining the PC version of the game, with descriptions applicable to playing on an Xbox One controller. There's definitely a lot to play here, so let's take a closer look. R-Type's deliberately slow pace is something that sets it apart from a great many of its contemporaries, and when compared to a lot of the biggest shooters from 2009 to present, R-Type Final 2 definitely continues the trend that the series set over 30 years ago. The typical 8-way control found in this game will move the player's chosen ship at a fairly good rate, but its speed can be increased or decreased at will by pressing either the left bumper or left trigger. While players start at speed 2, speed 4 is where we prefer to be, though level 3 might be a bit more balanced. It should be noted that if the player dies, their speed will always be reset to 2, which is annoying, especially when trying tricky segments over and over again, with 4 being the most optimal way to do it. But at the very least, player movement is no longer tied to speed power-ups, allowing players a better chance at recovery if they die. Every ship in the game has a number of different weapon systems, starting with the basic shot. This small shot type can be fired in a single-shot manner using the X button or fired rapidly with the B button by default. Players can also hold the X button to charge a powerful attack using their ship's special wave cannon. Various charge strengths can be fired depending on how full the gauge is, but if the X button continues to be held, a secondary charge will occur, resulting in a much more powerful discharge. Many ships have 3, 4, or 5 charge levels, allowing for an obscene amount of damage to be dealt to anything from Zakkos to bosses. We have to say, vaporizing a boss with a single hit from a high-level wave cannon is beyond satisfying. Of course, there's more. Every now and again, the player will encounter a mecha known as a POW armor, which, when destroyed, will leave an item behind for players to collect. First and foremost of these are multicolored laser crystals that will summon the series' trademark Force module. The Force can be mounted on the front or rear of the player's craft and is instrumental in many aspects of the player's offensive and defensive capabilities. The first crystal summons the Force, while the second upgrades it to fire an enhanced laser weapon when mounted. The third upgrade then strengthens the Force's laser shots to their most powerful form while growing it to its largest size. In general, red crystals enable a linear fire mode, blue an angled spread type, and yellow a vertical attack. Knowing which weapon to use in various parts of each stage, especially later in the game, will be extremely helpful in making efficient progress. But that's not all. The Force can also be used as a defensive shield for most basic shots fired at the player, and can even be launched in the direction that it's mounted. In doing so, it can be thrown into enemies to deal damage directly, or allow players to take out enemies across the screen with the Force's own standard shot patterns. Again, with a larger Force comes a more complex, more powerful shot pattern as a result. The Force can be launched and recalled by way of the A button. The Force will also take on a charge known as Dose as it makes contact with enemies and destructibles. Dose will fill a gauge in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, indicated with a bar and a percentile numeric indicator. At 100%, a Dose break can be performed, which will release a hugely powerful screen-consuming attack that completely destroys or heavily damages absolutely everything, bosses included. Some stages allow for Dose to be built up rapidly, others not so much, but Dose break can be extremely handy when things get too tight or overwhelming. Players will also be able to collect missile add-ons as well as defensive bits, which can help in clearing shots and foes directly above and below the player depending how many have been collected. Missiles and bits will differ by ship, with some being extremely powerful while others are decidedly less so. Stages progress slowly, and enemy formations can appear from all directions depending on the part of the stage the player is currently at. Most move at a decent clip, while others can be nimble or more plodding. With this in mind, knowing what speed to take on each section of the game is almost as important as knowing what enemies and obstacles are incoming. But this is taken even further. Another neat aspect to R-Type Final 2 is the ability to switch aircraft between stages. Depending on the types of weapons the player's ship features, some will perform better than others in certain areas. Players can also switch out their craft at game over, which is beyond helpful. And that brings us to the insane depth of the R Museum. Clearing any one stage will reward the player with various amounts of 3 different elements that are used to develop new ships. This is key to getting aircraft that are more powerful with better wave cannons to take on stronger opposition at higher difficulties. There are just a ton of ships to develop and collect, over 50 so far, but it will definitely take time, a lot of time, to get enough mats to develop everything. But sometimes that's not even enough. Some ships require a specific stage to be cleared, while others require a password to unlock. And no, they don't unlock using the PS2 codes from Final 1. We tried. The short of the long of it is, fans will definitely have a ton to chew on as they make their way towards that coveted 1cc on R-Typer. Players can register up to 12 ships from the R Museum into their hangar for use in the main game. Any ship can be customized not only in a number of aesthetic ways, but also in terms of what missiles and bits will be equipped. And while not every ship can use every type of bit or missile, this will still allow players to form some serious strategies for their entire run, aside from being a great feature in general. R-Type Final 2 takes place over the course of 7 stages, but like R-Type Final 1, specific factors will lead to different paths later in the game. There are 3 different endings in R-Type Final, and while the conditions for reaching them are much less complex than this game's direct predecessor, it at least opens up a decent amount of replay value in and of itself. And generally speaking, it's a pretty fun time. This game is definitely going to kill players in myriad unexpected ways, but that's just how R-Type do. This game will spit everything out in exactly the same way at precisely the same points of every stage. And paired with its slower pace and some player memorization, success should be an eventuality rather than an insurmountable feat. Of course, 5 difficulties exist here, all of which, from practice to R-Typer, are available right out of the gates. So if normal is just a bit too easy, Bido and R-Typer are where you want to be. If all of this sounds pretty decent, that's because it actually is. However, there are a couple of issues we found in both the game's design and performance. Primarily, the amount of materials players will receive for development is on the small side, and it's generally uneven, as it seems based on the kinds of enemies players have destroyed. Sure, boosts of these elements can be obtained in the in-game shop, but they get tapped out very quickly. Etherium in specific is much harder to acquire than Solonium or Bidonium. Speaking of ship development, at least one ship we discovered requires a future update to be applied for it to even be accessible. This one single example makes us feel, even if just a small tiny bit, that R-Type Final 2 didn't ship finished. And that's never an especially great sign. So far, it's just the one ship, but who knows what else hasn't been implemented yet. We do have to point out, though, that a number of hazards and shots will often get lost in the special effects that will blitz the screen. This can lead to a lot of frustrating deaths. Higher visibility bullets or visibility priority with regards to placing enemy bullets over explosions and player weapons definitely needs to be implemented. Finally, at least in the PC version, the menus can sometimes get a little buggered up, shifting the player's cursor to weird spots on its own. Alt-tabbing out to other applications can also cause the game to become unresponsive by way of its controllers or even the keyboard. This can take a bit of fiddling to correct if the game feels like it. The gameplay itself is rock solid, however. There should be an update forthcoming soon. From a gameplay standpoint, what's here definitely at least resembles R-Type, and Granzella has done a decent enough job of generally constructing the stages and pacing the action without making things too easy as a result. And yeah, fair enough, some areas are fairly sparse, but bumping up the difficulty definitely fixes that. Whether players had the patience to grind out every ship may vary from person to person, but getting to the point of a 1-credit clear should hold players' interest for a good amount of time. At least for us anyways, we'll be developing and collecting as many ships as the game allows, and having a fine time doing it. For all of the complexities found within the ship development and gameplay features of R-Type Final 2, it doesn't have an especially complicated scoring system. Essentially, players will achieve a score simply by shooting and destroying as much as possible in every stage. Additional points are earned by collecting weapon, missile, and bit power-ups. There is, however, a bonus system associated with higher difficulties. Playing on kids, for example, will increase point output by 5% to start, while playing on R-Typer will start play with a boost of 35%. These values grow with the player's force until it reaches maximum level, as well as with other factors such as achieving and maintaining maximum dose. This naturally should allow players to get a better and better score. However, score level can also be lost if dose is used or if a life is lost. At death, these values reset to their basic rate. Curiously, there doesn't seem to be an extend score in R-Type Final 2. The lives players start with are the only lives they'll have throughout their run, regardless of how well the player scores. As it turns out, this basically follows the trend started with R-Type Delta, which continued with the original R-Type Final, as neither game featured an extend score either. There are no online leaderboards in R-Type Final 2 either, which is a bit of a shame, but at the very least players can see what their best scores are by stage and by difficulty in the pilot record section of the main menu. Any of these stages can be accessed for a score attack session, so long as they've been cleared of course, with full run sessions opening up when the game has been completed. Okay, it's time to address the white elephant in the room: performance. Depending on the platform players choose, R-Type Final's performance will absolutely differ. We have to get this out of the way, and it's going to cause a lot of controversy, I'm sure. Switch players were quick to point out when we took a look at the demo versions that it, quote, felt fine, and that we were being nitpicky about this specific version, and fair enough, if the game works for you all, great, no worries. However, I also put my money where my mouth was, and even compared to base PS4, it exhibits the worst performance bar none with regards to frame drops and, for lack of a better term, it's pokey game speed. The action almost pulses or surges most of the time, unless it locks itself into 30 frames per second or less by dropping frames. It's rougher around the edges and features less in the way of shadows, lighting, and special effect quality, with noticeable element in texture pop. Some areas are also totally different from other versions. There's a solid floor here in Stage 1, for example, rather than a mesh floor as seen on the PS4 and PC. Load times are also significant, and it can take a really long time to get back into the action, especially after death. It's a problem, especially compared to other versions. Needless to say, we won't be spending too much time with this one, unless we're road tripping or traveling. Which, of course, brings us to the ever-present Joy-Con drift issue. Unless playing with a better third-party Joy-Con solution or with a Pro controller on the go, players may find that Joy-Con drift will seriously harm this game's staying power in a portable capacity. It's very, very far from an optimal way to play. PlayStation 4, at least played on a base system, also exhibits a somewhat chunkier frame rate in a lot of places, becoming noticeably less smooth in somewhat sparse areas. But it is a vast improvement over the Switch version, even at a glance. We're sure that a PlayStation 4 Pro or a PlayStation 5 has the potential to iron out these frame drops, and the game should behave identically on all Xbox counterparts. The load times are also quicker than on the Switch, making it easier and less frustrating to get back into the action, but there is still a slight texture and element pop present as well. With these two platforms in mind, we gotta say, the PC version is, by all metrics, considered the best, most flexible one to play. Not only does it allow for multiple resolutions, VSync, better maximum frame rates, and the most stable, smoothest performance through the entire game, regardless of how busy things get, it also has the potential for the fastest load times using an SSD. While texture and element pop is still kind of present, it's so fast, it's a non-issue. We also noticed that the sound skipping during the looping effects on PlayStation 4 and Switch is mostly absent here, making this the best sounding version as well. We're running R-Type Final 2 from a solid-state drive on a rig with an i5-9900, NVIDIA GTX 1660, and 32GB of RAM. Thanks to the excellent clarity and ultra-satiny smoothness combined with a snappy load time, we may never look back. Sorry, inaugural Flight Edition. Try again, kid. Any controller can be used here too, from generic USB to Xbox 360 to PS4 and much, much more. We've even been using the Switch's RAP5 Hayabusa arcade stick in PC mode, and it feels pretty great. Therefore, PC is simply, hands down, the best way to play. R-Type Final 2 also has a Day 1 DLC pack available for about $7 or $8 US. A stage pass can also be purchased for around $20 US or so that collects all 3 DLC packs, which will go live between now and sometime in June. Each of these packs opens up a couple of extra super difficult tribute stages for players to take on. A total of 7 will be made available across all 3 packs, and thankfully, as of now at least, they're not required for unlocking new ships, to our knowledge. The first of these stages, X 1.0, is a remake of R-Type 3's Fire Cask Factory, and true to the third game's reputation, it can get pretty ridiculous. Taking out these fire vents will make it a lot easier to manage, but only if the player's ship is up to the task. The R9WF Sweet Memories worked well enough to this end. The second, X 2.0, is actually a remake of one of the stages from R-Type Leo. It's considerably harder than X 1.0 with moving platforms and all kinds of additional hazards strewn all over the place. And a ton of quick thinking and dexterity is going to be needed to get through this one. We managed to get through it using the R9WB Happy Days thanks to its splitting wave cannon. On the one hand, it's cool to get these extra stages, especially from the oft-overlooked Leo. On the other, these seem like a bit of a cash grab. They could easily have fit right in as an unlockable for performing well in the game. Instead, it kind of reinforces the incompleteness of this specific release along with the ships that have placeholder R-Museum placement, yet are still allegedly in development. We'll follow up as more DLC is released for R-Type Final 2.
Now, you are about to go into the start sequence.
R-Type Final 2 has some of the slickest visuals and most incredible special effects found in a shooting game in recent memory. It uses the Unreal Engine to produce some truly stunning visuals, from the ships to the enemies to the weapons, on a level that has not really been seen in the genre up until now. It's crazy how close the target screenshots during its announcement match up with what made it into the final game, Switch notwithstanding of course, with one notable glaring exception. Stage 3. Many players, us included, have been wondering about this stage in specific as it uncharacteristically features some of the plainest looking elements in the entire game. The textures and polygon counts for damaged sections are almost N64 quality, while other elements simply melt away with no damage visibly remaining as they do so. There's even a bizarre pixelated nebula, albeit with a heavy blur filter, juxtaposed with a very detailed, sharp-looking planet. We may never really know if they just missed the stage, or if it's just filled with placeholders for the time being, or if it was meant to be like this all along, but it sticks out as perhaps the single least impressive thing about the entire game. It's definitely a head-scratcher. Of course, R-Type in general is also well known for having a very specific, flavor when it comes to its presentation. We all saw the obvious naughty bits incorporated into the designs in R-Type Dimensions representations of R-Type 1 and 2, and everyone has seen the rather awkward encounter in the final stage of the first R-Type Final. Thankfully, there are no awkward dongs to be seen anywhere in Final 2. Whoops, spoke too soon. While it may lack the signature biological horror found in previous titles, R-Type Final 2 instead takes on a little more of its own personality as a result. I mean, just look at this excellent slug with an R9WB for a head. What the heck? It may be a little more bland, sure, but there's no shortage of great set pieces, Stage 3 notwithstanding. We do wish that the enemies and bosses were a bit more inspired, though. Fighting a series of bullet-spongy boxes only gets us so far. On the sound front, Final 2 features a mix of driving techno, swelling orchestral pieces, and plenty of ambience throughout the player's run, and it all mostly works. Again, Stage 3 feels suspiciously placeholder with a music track that reminds us of hundreds of promotional videos for various products, reaching for that epic kind of feel, complete with a near-identical chord progression and that one signature chord that really ties it all together. You know the one. Stage 3, am I right? Once again, the charge effect and other looping sounds have a jarring skip to them on Switch and PlayStation 4, but it seems to be ironed out on PC. Generally speaking though, most of the sound effects found in R-Type Final 2 are lifted wholesale from R-Type Final 1, so they'll feel very familiar. Another huge part of Final 2's presentation is the R Museum, which is just filled with lore and information for each unlocked ship with an opportunity to get right up close and personal with any unlocked aircraft. The level of detail found on all of these ships, even, admittedly, on the Switch, is bound to be a great incentive to continue ship development long after the game has been cleared in one credit. There are at least 99 craft to develop with the possibility of the entire roster of 101 from Final 1, though not nearly all of them are available to be developed yet. Hopefully we'll be able to soon, and hopefully none will be paywalled. But it does bother us quite a bit that so many are missing. It should also be noted that, generally speaking, all of the descriptions found here are lifted directly from R-Type Final 1 as well. Enemy information and art pieces are also unlocked in the war records by satisfying various conditions. R-Type Final 2 also features an in-depth pilot and war record, which allows players to customize their pilot with suits, helmets, and even poses purchased from the store using R medals. Players can also create a saying for their pilot, though for some reason the game has an issue with the word miraculous and miracle. Who gets to see all of this is a mystery, outside of screen capping and sharing it online. Changes to the pilot's suit are also reflected in the game's cutscenes, which is a nice touch. Speaking of customization, you all have no doubt probably noticed the 88 emblazoned on all of the ships you've seen in this review. A number of decals like this can be purchased in the in-game shop to supplement the starting selection of decals and applied to any ship on any of its various components, which, like the pilot's outfit, will be seen in the game's intro scenes and in-game as well. The ability to fully personalize any ship in the game gives R-Type Final 2 one of the most engaging ship rosters in shooting games today, and that's just awesome. We will say though that the decal customization controls are very finicky. We managed, but only just. Players can even customize the title screen, loading screen, stage names, and even the actual title of the game itself through this special selection on the main menu. However, this can only be done when certain conditions are satisfied. We settled on R-Type Final Reboot, in Classic, Final 1, and Final 2 fonts respectively. Nice! There's also another selection in the special menu allowing Kickstarter backers to enter codes, but for regular players like us, that's a feature we don't need to pay attention to. Unless someone out there is sharing. Is someone out there sharing? No matter. Whew, this has been exhausting, but we're almost there. Rounding out the presentation are easy-to-follow menus and a set of achievements on PlayStation, Xbox, and Steam for players to work towards. So, how does R-Type Final 2 stack up? Let's take a look. R-Type Final 2 doesn't suffer from crippling speed reductions on death, which is a huge plus, despite having checkpoints. It is otherwise just as expected of an R-Type game, though the customization controls are kind of not fantastic. R-Type Final 2 doesn't skimp on the challenge, especially on Bido or R-Typer difficulty. On normal and below though, there is a very approachable game that normal, everyday players can dig deep into, with 1cc's being a very real possibility. Played over the course of 7 stages, R-Type Final 2 also has 3 branching paths with different endings depending on specific events. The grind to get materials for all of the ships will surely lead to tedium though. There are some incredible weapon effects and some amazing backgrounds throughout the game, but the enemy and boss design is mostly uninspired. Stage 3 though, that stage is mysteriously basic, poorly textured, and devoid of much personality at all. Shots and hazards can also often get hidden by special effects. The music selections work fairly well for the most part in R-Type Final 2, with one track being firmly stuck in meh territory, while another is a clear standout. Some looping sound effects skip on PlayStation 4 and Switch, but not on PC. R-Type Final 2 may not have all 101 ships found in Final 1 yet, but the development trees that they exist in are great, and the customization aspect to R-Type Final 2 is sure to have its fans. All versions of R-Type Final 2 sport a moderate cost of about $40 digitally, with increased cost for physicals and digital deluxe versions. But of course, the large amount of replay in R-Type Final 2 gives them a great cost-to-value ratio. So was it worth the 17-year wait? Well, yeah, probably. It doesn't quite measure up to R-Type Final 1 for me, as it were, but it scratches that seemingly chronic itch that has flared up, thinking of all the good times we had with R-Type's formerly final shooting game. And who knows, we may yet go back to check out Final 1 too, though maybe not quite as in-depth as we did this time around. The amount of content to be found here is extensive, and while we strongly believe the Day 1 DLC should have just been included in the game to begin with without fleecing fans out of yet more cash, there's still plenty to do and see. But there's also a lot of content missing as of this release, and that bothers us. Just, ship a finished game. Whatever happened to that? As such, R-Type Final 2 gets a 4 out of 5 on PC, a 3.75 out of 5 on PS4, and a 3 out of 5 on Nintendo Switch. You can get a copy of R-Type Final 2 on PC, PlayStation 4, Xbox Series consoles, and the Nintendo Switch for about $40. For all those wondering, 88 is actually a reference to one of my earliest music pieces called 88 Omega. You all know the Studio Mudprints jingle. Well, 88 Omega was the song that it was originally arranged from. Now you know. Now it's time for some more retro action with Blaster Master for the NES in episode 302. Then we're on to another super review with the North American and Japanese versions of my first real shmup. Air Fortress is coming up in episode 303. See you all in the next episode.